Can we just give Tim a round of applause? I know that I've gotten to know Tim over the last year, and I've been doing this work for a long time, and I just think he has so much character, integrity when it comes to, working with victims and survivors and kind of telling the story. And I just applaud him, because a lot of times when you're at an event, if you look around the room, it's mostly women, and I just always applaud him for the work that he's done, and he just is really extraordinary when it comes to fighting for this issue. So, and I get to go after him, which is great. He's a really good speaker. So, like Leanne said, my name is Tracy McDaniel, and I am the founder and the CEO of Restored. I founded Restored 4 years ago. I started out at the Julian Center. I've been working with victims of trafficking and sexual exploitation for 6 years. And I founded Restored 4 years ago because God had put this vision on my heart to help young girls, and we had this just huge gap in our community. So 4 years later, here we are, and I'm going to bring Laura up in a little bit, and she's going to give a challenge for you, but kind of to touch what Tim said is that, Restored works with mostly teenagers. So the average age we serve is 16. The youngest is 11. We serve girls from 11 to 24. I have experience in both working with young adolescents and adults. And just last year alone, we served 85 children, and that's not including any of the individuals over the age of 18. We partner with law enforcement, so we do a lot of recovery operations. So we provide those kids with recovery services, making sure that they have clothing and food. We're in the hotel rooms making sure that we are connecting them with Department of Child Services. We have victim advocates who go in and they work with that child from the beginning, the middle, and the end. And kind of what I say my job is, I feel like a lot of the times is I am holding the system accountable. I feel like that's kind of what I do every day, making sure that these kids are getting proper care. Kind of what Tim says, and I like to talk about this, is human trafficking isn't the worst thing that's happened to these children. I like to talk about the victimology of that. These kids have experienced so much violence. They have a lot of complex trauma. I'm a forensic interviewer, so I go in and interview these children, and 90% of them have experienced sexual abuse and sexual molestation. Domestic violence, their parents are incarcerated, there's addiction, there's so many things. And by the time that they meet a perpetrator who is trying to, whether it's exploitation or trying to traffic them, they're extremely vulnerable. And we call traffickers sometimes the best kid psychologists, right? Because they know exactly what to say, what to do to get these kids to do what they need them to do to make a profit. So when we're working with children, we always want to make sure that they're getting proper treatment. They don't consider themselves victims, right? They consider themselves there's so much trauma bond to that perpetrator. Whether they're young or whether they're above the age of 18, they believe that they're in love with this person. And I use the analogy that if you're come from a home where all you're experiencing is domestic violence, you're being sexually abused, you may not have proper food, things are completely chaotic, and you meet someone, just like Tim said, at a gas station, they start having a conversation with you, you leave with them, they're providing you food. What 15-year-old doesn't want McDonald's every day? Or they're giving them clothing, they're taking them to get their hair done, they're taking them to get their nails done, they're giving them a phone, and they're already being abused at home, and then this perpetrator is telling them all the things that they want to hear. It seems way better than what they got going on at home, right? Like, how many of you guys as kids got excited about going to a hotel, right? They don't exactly understand what is happening. You know, they're not making rational decisions, right? You know, this guy, I've had kids trafficked for a new pair of tennis shoes. I've had kids trafficked because of drugs. That's how they're numbing themselves out. So there's so much victimology that goes with the mindset of working with these kids and working with adults. You know, it's extremely complicated. When I founded Restored, it was really because I just had this vision that God had given me about a home for kids, right? We had no adequate place for them, kind of out of the chaos. And, you know, that dream came true yesterday. So Restored partners with the Youth Opportunity Center, and it has literally been a 2.5-year labor of love. And I have so much gratitude because yesterday we had the ribbon cutting on True Harbor, which will be a 16-bed facility for victims of trafficking and sexual exploitation. And it is, because we need more places, you know, and they are going to get amazing clinical care because that's important. You know, we do recovery with law enforcement all the time, and I spend more time with law enforcement than I spend with other social workers. But honestly, you know, they're kind of like Tim. We've done some stuff together. Like, that role is so important, but the recovery is the easy part for them. It is a marathon. It is not a sprint. PTSD is real. Trauma is real. You can get the best treatment and still go back to the life. The trauma bond, it takes anywhere between 9 to 12 months for a child really to get adequate care. Because in the beginning, you know, there's so much going on, but they're trying to get back to their perpetrator because they love them. You know what that love looks like for them. So it takes evidence-based practices. It takes a village, you know, even working with community. You know, we work with, you know, Department of Child Services, probation officers, juvenile judges across the state, law enforcement, other victim service providers, counseling. It literally takes a village to try and make sure we are giving adequate services. But, you know, we can take a kid out of a hotel, we can take a kid out of a situation, but the truth of it is exactly what Tim says. The perpetrator may or may not be arrested. The buyer who's been purchasing sex from them goes home, and that kid is left to deal with all the trauma. They're left to be in the mindset of what's going on. How did I get here? I hate you. You've ruined my life forever. There's not a lot of family attachment. There's completely unhealthy attachments. And that's hard. Can you imagine like being, you know, 16 and you're kind of the one holding the bag, right? And that's what it is. So that's why, like, for Restored, you know, our advocates are so important. Because for a lot of these kids, they've had 10 to 15 case managers. You know, they have people coming in and out. They've been on probation multiple times. A lot of them have criminogenic behavior. But it's a resource to know that someone's going to be there from the beginning, the middle, and the end. And just kind of how Tim says, you know, we have this huge demand. And until we go after that, we're just going to keep recovering kids. You know, we have this huge opiate issue really right in our state and around the country. And, you know, when we talk about someone who is, you know, adult or that's, you know, really 18, 19, 20, that they're older, is engaging in prostitution, in most cases they were trafficked or they were abused. You know, nobody wakes up one morning and says, you know what, I think that I really just want to go into prostitution. There are so many things that lead up to that. I think for, you know, I say often, like, I feel like I live sometime in this, like, really dark world, and I like to think of the hope. You know, there are so many, I'm on the IPATH task force, and I've been on it for 6 years, and there are phenomenal people in this state doing really amazing work. And it's not perfect, and it's messy, and sometimes we just don't get along, and sometimes we do. But the work and the progress I've seen from where I began, when I first started at the Julian Center, like our state was really focused on foreign-born individuals. Like we were foreign-born individuals, that's what the grant funding was for. And we have really did kind of a turnover to see, efforts to make sure that we're recovering kids, but making sure that adults and individuals that are engaging, that are in massage parlors or labor trafficking, that there are services and that people are fighting for them. I know for our team and just the individuals that we work with closely, like there is not one person on that team that is not extremely passionate about this, because you couldn't do this work if you weren't. I mean, it really does have a shelf life at times. I say that like these kids deserve our fight, right? Even, as you guys are in here, and I'm going to bring Laura up in a little bit, and she's going to just kind of challenge you, but, there's so much hope that comes out of this. I am so blessed as an advocate I go to conferences and I work with survivors around the state, and they really talk about best practices and what helped them, what didn't work, because a lot of times we have this idea that, okay, we've got them out and now life is going to be perfect. And I say this all the time, like these are not Barbies on a shelf. You can't put them back together again. They're not the same person that they were when they ran away. They've changed. They've been abused. There's so much complex trauma. There's so much going on. But I also see the hope in that. When these kids and adults, they're getting proper treatment, there is hope. When people are kind of filling in and standing in the shadows and saying, we believe you and we want to help you, there's hope for them. There's hope for them in Christ, right? The girl who changed my life was because I knew that God loved her as much as he loved me. It didn't matter that she had been incarcerated and lost a child to the system and all these other things had happened to her. It's a long fight, and there's a huge demand. And Tim is right. We've had conversations about the demand. It's middle-aged white men with children who are purchasing sex. I see it. That's who's purchasing sex. I think even when I first started this, I thought it was this, you kind of have this idea that it's the creepy guy down the street, and it's not. We have to go, I think the biggest thing that everybody can do in this room is to talk to your legislators, right? We have to start having higher penalties for individuals who are purchasing sex, not only from kids, but for adults. As I'm wrapping up, I'm going to bring Laura up here. I also just feel like it's my responsibility, as an advocate. First and foremost, I'm an advocate. Like when I founded Restored, so I am the CEO by default, but I'm an advocate for these kids. And I think that it's our responsibility as a community, and it's our responsibility when we're working with them, is to make sure that we're not sensationalizing this issue. This is, at the end of the day, trafficking or not, these are human beings. And we have to make sure that, we are providing care, but we have proper boundaries, and that we are not re-exploiting them. And that can be really hard to do at times. So making sure that we're using proper language, making sure that we're humanizing this issue, because they are human. It's somebody's sister, it's somebody's child, right? I do a lot of training with law enforcement. We're training other law enforcement across the state how to do, operations, how to recover children. And we say at the end, sometimes when we're training law enforcement, like, if it was your child, would you not want them to look for that child, right? No matter how many times they ran away. And we say that because people have this perception that sometimes these kids are defiant. They are, trust me. I've been called so many names. It's hard to count. But there has to be kind of like this deeper love for them, and every child deserves that, whether they've ran away 10 times, whether they are committing crimes or they're on drugs. And I mean, I believe that for adults too. I believe that we need better medical treatment in our state for victims and survivors. I believe that we need better mental health and addiction treatment. And that's not really just here in Indiana, that's really around the United States. Like, there's so many things that go into getting a kid or an adult to restoration. And that's the part that really takes a village. That's the part that really takes a lot of the community, is to, you know, gather and get together and brainstorm about how we are going to get services for these individuals. You know, I feel so blessed that, you know, YOC said yes to this project, and now there's a place for kids. But I, at the same time, know in a month that facility will be filled up. And then what, right? There's just, the more education we do, the more prevention that we do, you know, we're just consistently recovering, consistently trying to help, but we need better services. We need better legislation. You know, there's so many things that we have to do and rally as a community. And sometimes even the first thing is just letting your neighbor know that trafficking is happening in your own backyard. And I just want to touch on this as well. You know, not only do we work with in trafficking, but sexual exploitation as a whole. We kind of have this epidemic right now with social media and with children who, when Tim talks about this cultural issue, it is a cultural issue. You know, I probably get, you know, 2 to 3 phone calls a week of just kids sending nude pictures of themselves. Because it's become the norm, right? You can't turn on TV without seeing, you know, sensationalization of the body, or this is what you're supposed to look like. And, you know, these kids really believe that their body is their worth. And if we don't have that prevention, if we're not having real conversations with our kids about the internet and about social media and pornography and sex, it's just going to snowball to trafficking and sexual exploitation and sextortion and all these things where these men are on there searching for children. Just like I say, like, our guys, our undercovers are looking online trying to recover children, there's 100 perpetrators online doing the exact same thing, but that's all they have to do. So that education piece, that empowering our young girls, you know, empowering our boys, having conversations with these men about what it looks like to have, you know, character and integrity or pornography. And I think it's the responsibility of the church as well, you know, to start having these conversations. Because I'm here to tell you, with like Tim, it's men in the church that are purchasing sex. It's men in the church who are addicted to pornography. Not just men on the outside of these walls, but men inside. And having that real conversation. And, you know, I do believe we have to have this cultural shift for exploitation and trafficking to where we're going to make a dent in it, along with going after demand. I will have you guys ask me questions on the panel, but I'm going to bring Laura up because she has a challenge. Laura is, I don't think we couldn't run things without Laura. She's our community person, and she's just amazing. So I asked her to do the challenge at the end.
Thank you, Tracy. Really, we couldn't do anything that we do at Restored without Tracy. So she's incredible. She's devoted so much of her life to saving these children and walking alongside of them. And so a lot of you are probably sitting here very overwhelmed. I mean, what Tim was saying is very heavy. Even stuff that Tracy brought up is just so heavy. And as a community member, it's easy to just sit here and be like, well, what am I supposed to do if I haven't worked in the nonprofit field, or I'm not in social work, or I'm not a journalist for Indy Star? What can I possibly do about this? And at Restored, we are just so encouraged by people like you who take that first step to educate themselves. I mean, that's the first thing you can do, is to educate yourselves, because you are going to be a better advocate for this cause and a better advocate for victims and survivors if you understand what they've gone through. And, you know, you're doing the first step by being here and listening to experts talk about this issue and what these victims are experiencing here in Indiana. So, one, we just applaud you for that. But we are also very encouraged at Restored when people go beyond just the educational factor and that when they actually do something. So we have awesome volunteers that host events like this. I mean, I applaud Leanne for putting this on and this church for hosting this, because this is where it starts. What if one person turned into 30 people and 30 people turned into 300? I mean, we can make a difference. And so hosting events is huge. But really it starts with educating yourselves and then educating your community. So that's where the events come into play. But also bringing it home. So educating your next door neighbor, just like Tracy said. Or educating your daughter, your grandchild. It goes a long way. So education, and then be safe. So that again comes with educating your child or grandchild, and really, in our booth we have a handout. You don't see a lot of handouts about the services we do, but you see this one handout about parent and child safety. We want you to leave here, yes, knowing about Restored, and yes, knowing about all these other organizations, but we want you to leave here safe and making sure that your children are safe and grandchildren are safe, or your next door neighbor's child is safe. So we have a handout that is awesome, and it does give some tips about what you can do to bring this issue home and make a difference. So I really encourage you to grab that on the way out. And then lastly, it's easy to sit here and just sulk in the heaviness of it. I mean, we are in it day to day. I mean, we see it, we experience it, we feel it. But don't let that deter you from doing anything. Really let this spur you into action. It's so crucial. So there's a book out there that I read recently called Everyday Abolitionist, what every community member can do to make a difference in the fight against human trafficking. So that's a great resource. If you just need somewhere to start, it provides very educational information, but then also gives you a lot of practical, tangible actions you can do. That's a great resource that I recommend to all of you. But ultimately, I just want to encourage you and applaud you for taking the first step and educating yourself. And then also, I hope that you leave here volunteering with an organization. I mean, it takes resources and time to serve these children. So people like you are needed. Yes, social workers and journalists and psychologists and shelters are needed, but we need community members to rally around organizations like Restored, because it's not possible without people like you. Like, these kids don't get served without your donations. These kids don't get served without your help doing administrative work so we can go speak to kids in a high school to educate them. So don't underestimate the power of your actions in your platform. Use it to make a difference. So that's all I have for you guys.